Hey guys, this is Kendall Terry, and we're going to be looking at transport and vascular plants today, which is chapter 38 in our book. The first question would be, where does transport occur in plants? Well, the obvious place that you should know by now would be the vascular system, xylem and phloem cells. And we're going to get to that a little bit later, but first we're going to actually look at all of the things that need transported in plants and kind of how that whole process works. So where do we start? Well, obviously, water and sugar and that transport with the xylem and phloem, and you guys know that. But some transport things that happen in plants that a lot of people don't think about are things like, for instance, carbon dioxide has to be transported into the leaf. Oxygen is going to be transported out. That's a very important process, and we're going to see how that process takes place in the leaf. Another are minerals down here. Minerals in the roots have to be absorbed. That plant needs certain minerals to survive, certain nitrogens, certain phosphates and phosphorus molecules as well. Molecules that the plant can't make on its own, although it doesn't. It is an autotroph. It makes its own food, but there's also other things that it still needs. And then you can also look at down here in the roots. The roots have to grow, and to grow you need energy. Well, what process do you need to do to get energy? Cellular respiration. What do you need for cellular respiration to occur? Well, you've already got the sugar that was made up in the leaves. You've got, but you need oxygen. Oxygen's so important. So those roots have to be able to absorb oxygen down here in the soil. And then as cellular respiration takes place, they want to get rid of carbon dioxide. And that transport has to occur as well. So the first thing to look at then is, how are solutes transported between cells? In other words, how are the things that are needed to come in able to be brought into the plant? Well, here's a couple ways. The first would be using a positive ion just concentration gradient, simple diffusion. You can see that right here in this top one. Potassium out here in the extracellular space. So that's more of a positive environment. Inside the cell, more of a negative environment. So it just goes from high concentration to low concentration using that proton channel, or that protein channel. And in doing that, it just gets those positive ions straight into the cell where they're needed. Some negative ions or anions also need to be transported in. How do they get in? Because now they're kind of going against their concentration gradient, going from that more positive environment to that more negative environment, and they're negative. So that would actually go against their concentration gradient. Well, you don't want to use energy for that process. You would waste way too much energy trying to get those in. So it uses a proton co-transporter. So you've got protons out here in the extracellular space. They naturally want to diffuse in, positive on the outside, negative on the inside. They want to diffuse in, and they're going to carry these negative ions with them. So that process still passive transport, no energy required to get them in. This also will work for neutral solutes like sugar. Sugar's a neutral solute. Sucrose, for instance, needs to go into the cell. How does it get into the cell? It piggybacks on the proton. Well, how is that proton? How are those protons able to get out of the cell? How do you get so many of them out there? Well, you got to have a pump to get them out. Now, this pump does take energy. It's not as much energy that would be needed in the cell if it was having to pump all of those things outside in, but it is able to pump hydrogens out. You've seen proton pumps in both cellular respiration and photosynthesis to this point. And it's how those protons are able to get out of the cell and then create that environment to piggyback those other things into the cell that are important for cell function. What influences the movement of water? Well, the influence of water movement is water potential. We've talked about water potential in the past. I encourage you to go back and review those labs and that sort of thing that we did that with. But in water potential, you've got solute potential and pressure potential. Most of the time, that's going to create a negative number. So water usually moves from high to low still, but it moves from usually a number that is less negative to a number that is more negative. And you'll see some examples of that as we go through this lecture and even some activities that we're going to do in class. So if you've got an artificial model here set up in a lab where you've got water potential on one side is 0, you add solute, so an increase of solute decreases the solute potential. That makes a negative water potential overall, and you can see that in the equation right here. This allows water then to move from the area of pure water to the area of the solute solution. Now, if you want water to move back, well, one way to do that would be to increase pressure. As you increase pressure, you can see that here in this equation, increasing the pressure balances out that decrease in solute, and that brings that number back to the equal water potential to just the pure water side. And this would cause water to be the same on both sides then, same level. Another thought there is then if you increase pressure even more, you could drive that water over by increasing water potential. And you see that here. If we continue to increase that water pressure, pressure potential, then you increase water potential to the point that it will drive water in one direction. Another way would be to increase what we call negative pressure. Negative pressure is a sucking motion. So you think of this when you're drinking out of a straw. You put a straw into a glass. As you suck in that straw, you're actually increasing negative pressure inside of that straw, and that pulls the water up, or the liquid that you're drinking, up into your mouth. So if a cell does this as well, or an organism, we're going to see how this actually works in plants. That motion, that increasing negative pressure, will pull water into that cell as well. So what does this mean for the plant cell? Well, in an environment, there are two really possibilities. Most cells and plants don't stay at the flaccid cell right here in the middle where everything just is equal out. That's usually not the case. More often than not, it either it needs water, or it doesn't, or it has too much water, or it has just the right amount of water, you might say. So if in a solution here, in a beaker here that we've got set up in a lab, we have the cellular water potential is greater than the environmental water potential, then water goes out of the cell. And this creates what we call in plant plasmolysis. And this is where the plant cell will actually pull away from the cell wall. And this allows the plant to wilt, which is what you see. If you see a plant wilting maybe in your house, the color has deepened and the plant edges are starting to curl up, or maybe it's falling over. That's due to not enough water being in the plant or in the cell. So water is out of the cell. The cells are going through plasmolysis. The opposite of that would be over here, where you water that plant overnight. All of a sudden that plant stands back up, the leaves become straight again, everything becomes tight, you could think of. Well, what happens? Well, the cellular water potential is less than the environmental water potential. So water's coming into the cell, and when water comes into the cell, it will increase. Now, in animal cells like yourself, as that water increases, it will eventually lyse the cell or bust the cell open. But in plant cells, remember, they have something we don't. They have a cell wall that surrounds that cell. And that cell wall is very rigid, and it's not going to pop. It's not going to allow the cell to lyse very easily. So as water comes in, it's going to hold its ground, and it'll plump up, but it's not going to burst. And that's going to, as it plumps, what's it doing? It's creating pressure. Now remember, water potential was solute potential plus pressure potential. So yes, the solute potential is low, and that's causing water to enter the cell. But as water enters the cell, eventually it's going to increase that pressure until eventually that's going to balance out to where that pressure is really tight in there, and that's called turgid pressure, where the plant cell is full of water due to that high solute concentration. Now, that water is going to move back and forth through aquaporins. Aquaporins are proteins in the cell membrane that allow water to move in either direction through passive transport. We didn't know that these existed until more recent science. We knew that water was moving across the cell membrane, and we knew it was passive transport, but it didn't make sense for it to go through the cell membrane. I mean, that's part of what we talk about, is that hydrophobic interior of the cell membrane. So how did that happen? We knew that there had to be something. Eventually we found them. There's several of them that we can identify now, and they're called aquaporins. So what are some transport routes that substances can take to get through from one cell to the next, in essence moving up and down the plant and so on and so forth? Well, when water or minerals or whatever is trying to move, there's a couple different routes. The first you'll see on here is green, and it's called the transmembrane route. Now, this route is actually very difficult for many substances, because you're talking about going from inside of the cell, out of the cell membrane, into the cell wall, to the cell wall of the next cell, through the cell membrane, back into that cell, so on and so forth, all the way down. That's going to take a lot of time, a lot of energy. Most substances don't travel regularly on a transmembrane route. Instead, they use one of the other two options. The blue line here represents what we call the symplastic route, and you can think of it as being really the simplest route. And it goes through plasmodesmata. Remember, we talked about these in the past. Those are the holes in the cell walls that line up, and as they line up, it will create an actual area through the cell wall that will connect even the cytosol of plants. So once a substance is in one cell, it can travel through the plasmodesmata, assuming it can fit through that opening, from one cell to the next. And that's a very simple route. It's called the symplastic route. Another route, which many people don't think about, is traveling through the cell walls, from one cell wall to the next adjacent cell wall. They butt up against each other. So as substance gets on this cell wall, it can actually just ride those cell walls out. That is called the apoplastic route. And that apoplastic route is nice, but it can cause problems that the plant has had to develop a solution for. So let's look at that. So here we've got the root. Now we know that the roots are responsible for absorbing water. We know root hairs increase surface area so that you can get the maximum amount of water absorption and mineral absorption into the root. That's great. Most of those are going to come through the symplastic route. They're going to go into the cell, get from one cell to the next through those plasmodesmata passages all the way over to the xylem. That works great. That's exactly how you want it to do if you're a plant. But some of those are going to travel through the apoplastic route. So you got some minerals, you got some water that's going to travel just from cell wall to cell wall to cell wall. Now this could be a problem. If that gets to the xylem cells and starts traveling up into the leaves, if this mineral is a mineral maybe that the plant doesn't need, it's something that could be harmful to the cells, it's something that you don't want into your cells, into your central vacuoles, stuff like that, maybe that mess up water potential of your cells. You've got to have a way of keeping that out. You don't want it just to travel on cell walls until it eventually causes a problem and then have to deal with it. So the plant cell actually uses what we call the Casparian strip. And you can see that here in purple on the screen. And this is a waxy layer or waxy material that will attach all of these cells together. And that Casparian strip will not allow stuff to go through the apoplastic route. It will actually surround that cell wall and join up cells one to another with that Casparian strip connecting all of them. So as stuff is traveling from cell wall to cell wall to cell wall, eventually hits this waxy area that it can't get through. So it has to actually go into that cell. And those are the endodermal cells. It has to go into that cell through the cell membrane. Why is that important? Because the cell membrane is the selectively permeable membrane of the cell. So it's going to be the bouncer, the buffer that allows some things in and others not in. And you want that to be the thing that judges what gets into your xylem cells and up into your leaves or up into the rest of your plant cell or your plant organism body. So this will keep unwanted and unrecognized substances out of the plant, a layer of protection here. It's kind of like what your skin does to your body by creating that barrier to keep certain things out. There's also some mutualistic relationships between plant roots and other biological organisms. One is mycorrhizae. This is the most common. About 97% of plants have this symbiotic relationship. It's mutualistic, where the fungus will spread out and allow even more water absorption. It will absorb water, bring it over, and exchange that water to the root, and in exchange, it gets sugar. Fungi, although they look like plants in many instances, are not autotrophs. They are heterotrophs. They cannot make their own energy, so they get sugar from the plant this way, and in exchange, they bring extra water to the plant. So it provides a system for the plants to get water. 97% of plants use this to effectively get the water need that they have, and in exchange, they exchange some sugar. Yeah, you got some loss there, but the balance of water coming in, it equals it out.